Central Moscow, Moscow's regional KGB headquarters. Early morning of August the 19th, 1991.
This is the officer on duty.
The events of the day that could have reversed the country's history. It was an attempt to depose President Mikhail Gorbachev and put his reforms on hold. Tanks and other hardware have been moved into Moscow. The city's key points have been taken over. August the 19th, 1991, Monday. Early in the morning, teacher Tatyana Yakovleva switched her TV on and saw the following picture. Instead of the usual programming, every channel was broadcasting Tchaikovsky's famous ballet.
I turned the TV on to check the latest news, and I was so surprised to see Swan Lake everywhere. I was switching the TV channels for a long time, thinking maybe there was something wrong with my TV set.
At the same time as the ballet broadcast, more than 700 tanks and armoured personnel carriers were being stationed in the streets. The plotters were in the Kremlin. Meanwhile, Moscow's so-called White House was at the centre of civil resistance. At the time, it housed the Russian parliament, where the people's deputies met in session.
It was past 7 in the morning when the security chief came to my place. When I opened the door, he told me I had better go to the White House right away. As far as I could tell, there was a coup going on in the country. That's how I learned about it. We decided to take a roundabout route instead of going straight to this building.
The coup was led by top brass and high-ranking communist officials. They had expected to get support from the population, who were dissatisfied with the long-drawn process of perestroika. They decided to make short work of Gorbachev's reforms.
The situation was quite odd. The country was in turmoil. There was a revolt of the hungry. People standing in line for sausages stooped to fistfights. And there were pervasive shortages on the consumer market. But the country's president waved goodbye to everybody and headed down south to the Crimea to relax.
The Crimean Peninsula's southern shore, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev's private residence near the village of Foros. Both it and scores of surrounding hectares became a prison for the head of state. Here he spent several days in what amounted to confinement.
The site can be seen from all sides. You get an almost bird's-eye view of it from that mountain. The road leading to the residence can easily be blocked with stones. After those events, the joke here was that Gorbachev's residence must have been deliberately built in this place so that he could be easily cut off from the outside world.
KGB Colonel Lev Tolstoy was directly involved in the events of those days. He is a direct descendant and namesake of the celebrated Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy. Before he rose to the rank of colonel, he served as a bodyguard. On August the 18th, 1991, top KGB officials ordered him to block all exits from the Gorbachev residence.
I have no idea what would have happened if Gorbachev and others had tried to escape from the residence. But I do think he would have faced very unpleasant consequences.
This is exclusive footage of the residence of the first Soviet president. The splendid park was laid out almost on bare rocks. This had special significance because Gorbachev was known to be very fond of strolling by the seaside.
These Arizona cedars, these pines, and these shrubs were all planted just before the territory was to be commissioned in 1988. That was a short while before Mikhail Gorbachev's first visit here.
The Crimean residence was codenamed Territory Zarya in KGB documentation. The interior design of the main building reflected the wishes of Raisa Gorbacheva, the president's wife. She was with Mikhail Gorbachev throughout the Foros ordeal.
We built what I would describe as internal defences there. Men carrying guns with live ammunition were posted all over the place. They were under strict orders not to allow provocations.
The Soviet president's study was on the second floor, close to the hall. It was here that Mikhail Gorbachev learned about his complete isolation from the outside world.
Mikhail Gorbachev's study looks just like it was back then. This is his desk, and that telephone was meant for communicating with government officials. The line was shut down at 4 p.m. on August 18th.
Gorbachev remained in his residence. Moreover, measures to isolate him were reinforced still further. Valery Shakh was the one who guarded the gate to the residence during the coup. KGB officers from Moscow kept a close eye on him, along with other local agents.
Special measures were taken. A truck was stationed on the helipad to prevent helicopters from touching down. A tractor with a trailer outside the gates was meant to prevent motor vehicles breaking through into the compound. Reinforced security precautions were introduced throughout.
Army General Valentin Varenikov was one of the key figures in the coup attempt. On August the 18th, 1991, he visited Gorbachev at his residence in the Crimea. Varenikov asked the Soviet president to recognize the legality of the coup.
We knew what we were going to do. I told him all that could somehow be fitted into a state of emergency. Gorbachev retorted by exclaiming that a state of emergency was bound to bring machine guns and blood in its wake.
I realized that other people as well as my family would suffer. No doubt blood would be spilled, certainly in such a vast country as ours. This country takes time to get worked up, but when it does, you can hardly stop it. My belief is the country's modernization without blood.
August 19th, 1991. Moscow, 11 a.m. A crowd halts armored personnel carriers heading for the city center. Demonstrators climb one of them, chanting, "No to fascism."
Hundreds of people gather on Manege Square in central Moscow. They are ready to oppose the so-called State Committee on the state of emergency. People who met each other back then during the coup still keep in touch and remember those events. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, brothers. I haven't seen you in 100 years.
When my parents woke me up in the morning, they told me that a coup was underway. I was actively involved in the Youth Democratic movement, so I said, if no one I know was arrested right away, this is no coup at all. Yes, there were tanks, but people were blocking them off. What kind of coup is it if tanks can be stopped short in their tracks?
A small radio set is one of the most treasured mementos from those days. People used it to listen to the few independent stations that were still on air.
One report said the Air Force refused to side with the coup. According to another, a military garrison in St. Petersburg also refused to back it.
It was great to hear that people in many towns were supporting us.
A minor radio station called Echo of Moscow was the main source of news in those days. The KGB shut it down in the first few hours of the coup, but whether by fair means or foul, its staff managed to regain access to the airwaves.
At one point, we even used telephone lines to reach out to our audience. There was no link between the studio and the transmitter, so our engineers used an analog telephone line. By all accounts, those were turbulent times.
Meanwhile, the coup organizers called a press conference in Moscow. Many took note of Gennady Yannayev's trembling hands. He named himself the country's head of state, claiming that Gorbachev had fallen ill. The press conference reached a turning point after a question from Tatyana Yakovleva, the then 24-year-old journalist.
Do you realize that what you have done today is a coup? Do you see parallels with your actions in Soviet history, 1917 or 1964?
As for your claim that a coup took place during the night, I would disagree with you, because all legal and constitutional norms were complied with.
To say that they looked hesitant would be an understatement. They looked as if life was dying out of them, and there was no vitality left in their ashy faces and shifty eyes. They looked like people who had lost a battle before they had a chance to start it.
August 19th, 1991, 12:08. A spontaneous rally began in Moscow's Manezhnaya Square. The crowd swelled as more and more people arrived. The events in Moscow are described as anti-constitutional coup. There are calls for an open-ended general strike.
From this day on, we are protesting until our demands are met.
No to fascism! No to fascism!
On August the 19th, 1991, top KGB officials in Moscow ordered reinforced security precautions at Gorbachev's residence in the Crimea. On the same day, Mikhail Gorbachev videotaped what has since become a famous address.
A coup has taken place. This anti-constitutional action is based on a tremendous lie.
But there was little chance of the tape being taken out of the compound. On the same day, Coast Guards protecting the residence attempted to establish contact with the president.
Since I was serving in one of the KGB's naval units, I was not allowed to communicate with the president. Therefore, I asked my wife to write a note in her own handwriting. The note said that the sailors were ready to take the president to a place of his choice. One of my subordinates took the note to the security guards, asking them to hand it over to Gorbachev. When he came back, they told him that nobody will be allowed to approach the residence and intruders will be shot.
Gorbachev's residence was secured from the sea even better than from the land. Oleg Alyoshin was one of the security guards there. During those days, nobody could approach the shore within less than 4 nautical miles without being spotted by the guards. If they saw the intruder as a possible threat, they were under orders to open fire.
3 groups on permanent duty scoured the woodland. Snipers were in position on the mountains. There was a soldier with a machine gun on top of the cliff near the bay. Remains of it can still be seen there. Hey for us! Happy celebrations!
A health resort for communist functionaries and their families was near the residence of the Soviet president. August is high season there. The resort was crammed with holidaymakers to capacity. Pavel Firsov of the Foros Resort was in charge of discos and other entertainment programs.
On August 19th, I said this to the head physician. Look, the country's president, Mikhail Gorbachev, is under arrest near here. Shall we cancel the dances? No, she said. The guests should not suffer. Let them dance. The situation with Gorbachev doesn't concern us.
Moscow, August 19th, 1991, 13:20. Water cannons attempt to break through to the downtown area. Demonstrators damage some of them and force them to turn back.
Meanwhile, the coup organisers ordered the arrest of the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. At the time, he was at his residence near Moscow. The chief of his security guards, Alexander Korzhakov, was with him. They drove a service car to Moscow and reached the city unhindered.
Yeltsin was seated between two guards. He flatly turned down the idea of wearing a bulletproof vest, so we simply put it over him just in case. That heavy vest weighing 9 kilos was of the kind worn in the army. The driver was told to go as fast as he could without stopping no matter what.
Yeltsin managed to get to the White House, where he reunited with his team. Later, he climbed a tank to read out a message to a large crowd that had gathered outside the White House.
We proclaim all the decisions and orders by that committee illegal.
By then, White House defenders had set up a makeshift barricade near the building in a bid to block the access of military vehicles.
Everybody was dragging whatever they could lay their hands on. A trolley bus stopped there. The driver got out and lowered the trolleys. The trolley bus was left standing across the road. The barricade was here. That's how we began blocking all approaches to the building.
The Crimea, the city of Sevastopol, a Soviet Black Sea fleet based 50 kilometers from Gorbachev's summer residence. Throughout the coup, first-rank Captain Semyonov waited for an order to rescue Gorbachev. But with the Defense Ministry part of the coup, their rescue plan was ignored.
First, the pockets of resistance were to be suppressed. Second, the president was to be found and taken under our protection. Third, the remaining pockets of resistance were to be eliminated, and we were to help evacuate the president by sea.
The upshot of it was that naval commanders only sent a telegram to Gorbachev urging him to hold on. That telegram was received by Lyubov Zhuravel, an employee of the Foros post office. Hundreds of telegrams addressed to Gorbachev were arriving from all over the Soviet Union. KGB men immediately seized all such mail.
Those 3 days, August 18th, 19th and 20th, were the most disturbing days in my life. We had no idea whether we would be allowed to go home or be arrested. Things were simply left to run their course.
Moscow was bracing for the worst-case scenario. People inside the White House expected an assault on the building. With that possibility in mind, they inspected all of the basement's secret passages leading out into nearby courtyards.
Some of the regular reports coming in here claimed that an assault on the building of the Supreme Soviet would begin in an hour's time. But why would they need an assault? The building is like an aquarium. All you need to do is just enter it, and that's all there is to it.
Ready? Go!
The assault order was in fact given to the KGB's so-called Alpha unit. The men were already on high alert, but for the first time in the unit's history, they demanded an open debate and a vote on the order before launching the operation.
It's over.
The commander asked everybody to voice their opinion on the operation and whether an assault was necessary at all.
Yes, yes.
Most of the men with a service record of more than 5 years said no to the operation.
The operation was called off, but casualties were still unavoidable. In the early hours of August the 21st, 1991, the crews of several armoured vehicles were ordered to move to another location in the city. White House defenders attempted to stop them because they thought the vehicles were heading towards the Parliament building to attack it. 3 young men died as a result. Lyubov Komar spent the night waiting for her son. Shortly before the August events, he had served as a soldier in Afghanistan. He went to the White House after hearing an appeal from Vice President Alexander Rutskoy, who called on people to go and defend democracy.
When my son heard Rutskoy's appeal, he went to the barricades, because that was a call from someone who served in Afghanistan too. But a day before, I asked him if he was going to the barricades, and he said no, that he had his fill of fighting in Afghanistan. He had no business monkeying around at barricades. But on Tuesday it was a different story. On Wednesday I learned that he was no more.
After that tragedy, it became obvious the coup had failed. Tanks began leaving Moscow on August the 21st. A car carrying Russia's Vice President Rudskoy overtook one of the convoys. He was rushing to the airport to bring Mikhail Gorbachev back to Moscow. There was a total mess, both on land and in the air.
None of the ground controllers guided our flight, not even during the landing. Regardless, it was a trouble-free flight. When we touched down, the aerodrome superintendent drove up to the plane. I introduced myself and said I needed a car and a bus to take us to Gorbachev. "No problem, Comrade Rudskoy," he said. "Go right ahead."
Rudskoy's plane, with Gorbachev on board, touched down in Moscow on August the 22nd, 1991. The coup had failed, but the Soviet president had in effect returned to a different country. Much had changed during those 3 days in August.
I defended the Soviet Union to the last bullet. That's what I did. But I failed.
The finale of the standoff, central Moscow. The monument to Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of Soviet secret police, standing in front of KGB headquarters in Lubyanka Square, is pulled down. It was a symbol of the beginning of a new epoch.
The bright future which the communists had been talking about for 70 years finally became a possibility. We could build it with our own hands. We were used to the fact that the state was omnipotent, that it could break and destroy anyone. But this time nothing happened. People had risen like a wall. We said no, enough.
At approximately the same time, the Prosecutor General's office launches an investigation into the role of the coup organisers. The plotters tried to pass the blame onto Crimean frontier guards.
Initially, the team of investigators of the Prosecutor General's office displayed tolerance. Then they began dropping hints, urging us to repent and take the whole blame for Gorbachev's isolation. Otherwise, we would face charges of high treason. As military men, we became very bitter when we heard the word treason.
However, the frontier guards were later acquitted. Only those who gave the orders were arrested, the driving forces of the coup led by Gennady Yanayev. A year later, they were released from prison under an amnesty. Yanayev died in 2010. This is an excerpt from one of his last interviews.
Many misguided decisions were made during those 3 days in August 1991. Tanks should not have been brought in, and demonstrative force should not have been used. All that could have been done in a different way.
When people today are asked whether they want a revival of the Soviet Union, only 9% say yes. There is no chance of the state being revived in the form of the Soviet Union.
Mikhail Gorbachev has never returned to his summer residence since August 1991. Now it's the property of the Ukrainian state. However, top officials rarely vacation there. The former KGB Colonel Tolstoy makes no secret of the fact that even now he has no right to talk about some aspects of what happened then. Gorbachev's Crimean residence still harbours many secrets relating to those 3 days in 1991. Only when new information has been declassified will it be able to shed light on them.
To be frank, this place is not considered to be very lucky at all.
This is the officer on duty.
August 22nd, 1991, 5 a.m. Boris Yeltsin declares that the reactionary coup has failed and thanks the defenders of the White House. 12 p.m. For the first time, the three-colored flag is raised over the Supreme Council of Russia. Yeltsin! Yeltsin!
Only 5 months are left before the collapse of the Soviet Union.